Welcome back to True Crime Monday. Wednesday. I do have a few updates before we get too hot and heavy into our show tonight. Do apologize for the loud noise. Unfortunately, laundry, so don't have much of a choice there. But back on topic. Tonight, I do want to apologize for missing last week's True Crime Wednesday. I actually lost track of time, forgot about what day it was just because of how hard I've actually been having to work during my day job. And with long hours and everything else that's progressing right now in my life, especially with the business, I literally just lost track of time. So I do apologize for that. I'm trying to go and make better use of the time and better use of my calendar and all this, so that way I do remember when it is True Crime Wednesday. So I do apologize for that, and it will be better. But tonight we're going to be looking at an old case that we'd looked at a while ago, and I'm just going to be blunt. The death, the circumstances, everything, it doesn't really match up. I'll explain here in just a few moments, but this really is a strange case. And Laura Klausutis was the victim here. Alright, so let's get into the meat and potatoes. So, I'm going to give off a few notes that I had written, or typed up rather, before we start going into the articles, medical examiner report, her husband, her widowed husband, the letter he had sent to Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter, and a couple different articles concerning the case. Now, tonight we will only be available for at most an hour tonight, so I'm trying to go and cut it short at about 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, but we're gonna do our best. So we have 7 points here I want to cover that we had uncovered live when I was on Twitch before my indefinite suspension. Yeah. So first things first, Dr. Birkland, who is a medical examiner during Lord Klausutis' autopsy, stated in an article that Klausutis lost consciousness because of an abnormal heart rhythm, fell, and then hit her head on a desk. The head injury caused the death. Funny, where this death took place was in I believe he was a congressman, government official, we'll throw it that way, in his office. She fell and hit his head, or her head, and then died. Mrs. Klausutis had received a $6,000 raise prior to her death. A mail carrier who came in the office on July 19th said she appeared nervous. He said Klausutis told him she did not feel well. Okay, this is getting curious. Relatives said she had been taking medication for acne and that she suffered a head injury in a traffic accident when she was a teenager that left her in a coma. When she recovered, she had signs of short-term memory loss. Appeared to have been scrubbed out of existence, including in social and extracurricular groups. It's a little weird. Now, this is going to be a quote from a video, which I got to go and find, so when there is a part 2, there will be more of this. If there's not a part 2, there should be a video. I do know you guys are expecting quite a few videos from me. There's the Stephen Paddock case. There's more from Death of the Family series and Murder of the Gray State, yes. There's Bill Cooper. I mean, there's a ton of them. So expect those still. They will be coming. I'm just trying to go and get caught up so that way when I start doing my rounds at conventions and things like this next year, I want to make sure everything is done properly. So they should be available next year, hopefully earlier on. Death of the Family, there's some stuff coming up soon, so expect to see that shortly. But from that video clip, Mr. Scarborough, Joe Scarborough, the former congressman or government official, whatever he was, he had been quoted saying, quote, "Had sex with an intern. Then you had to kill her." I believe somebody else had said that at that point, but I'm not, yeah. And then he also had said, somebody had said, had sex with an intern, then you had to kill her. And then he goes, what are you going to do? So he's making light of her death in very, very poor taste, or he doesn't care. Who knows? Either way, still bad taste. And authorities were not sure if she had been there overnight or had opened the office a few minutes earlier, which means they could not determine necessarily the time of death. All we know is basically she had either just a few minutes earlier had died, which is kind of weird. Doesn't really make sense. So we're going to go and determine the time of death. Not tonight, but when we get back to this case, you guys will be able to see a time of death. We're going to go and get correlation, all this. Everything will be put in order so you can see how strange this is. Alrighty. So let's get into it. Alrighty. So we go over the medical examiner's reports. Now, I just got a hold of these again. I didn't ever transfer them from my last computer, so do apologize. So we're going to go over this as I had this all highlighted before. But so this is the medical examiner's report. So it says, the body of Lori Klausutis was discovered in the early morning hours of Friday, June 20th, 2001, so before September 11th, at her place of work at 348 Miracle Strip Parkway. Initial scene investigation revealed absolutely no signs of foul play. Well, that can be scrubbed out. This case fell under the medical examiner's jurisdiction, and an investigation and subsequent autopsy were performed to establish the cause and manner of death of Lori Klausutis. A complete autopsy was performed that same afternoon. That was rather quick. Initial autopsy findings were significant for a head injury sustained when she fell and struck her head. Final determination as to the cause of her fall require 1. Complete toxicologic examination, drug screens, further analysis of several internal organs, and a complete microscopic examination. Not really. You can actually see from the fall, you can actually start to calculate things like, for instance, the angle in which she fell, the height in which her head hit, the speed. There's all sorts of things you can gather from this, but I digress. Preliminary toxicology results were returned within 72 hours and were unremarkable. Okay, doesn't make a difference here. Subsequent analysis of several organs yielded a previously undiagnosed valvular condition of the heart that is known to cause cardiac arrhythmias, abnormal heart rhythms. This same condition was verified by microscopic examination of the valve. It is the presence of this abnormal valve and its known association with cardiac arrhythmias, to include sudden cardiac death, that caused Lori to fall and strike her head on the side of a desk, thereby causing the closed head injuries identified at autopsy. The cause of death of Lori Klausutis is as a result of an acute subdural hematoma, a blood clot, that resulted from closed head trauma sustained in a fall, which was as a result of a probable cardiac arrhythmia secondary to valvular heart disease. Okay. The head injury, which represents the immediate cause of death, was clearly as a result of an unprotected fall in a person who had lost consciousness or was losing consciousness from a probable cardiac arrhythmia. The manner of death is thus ruled as accidental. Okay, and then you get Dr. Birkeland giving up his number there at the bottom. All right. So this is cause of death. She was 28 years old. Autopsy was done on the 20th. Acute subdural hematoma from closed head trauma as a result of blunt force trauma sustained in a fall, which was precipitated by complications of floppy mitral valve disease. It was an accident. Okay. And we'll continue. Now, one might assume this is all a thing. Okay, now it is a thing. This is actual, these are diseases and conditions people do have, sure. But these are things that can also, a lot of it, which can be faked. I don't want to say faked, but like, they can be caused by other things, such as drugs and alcohol, certain types of abuses and things like this. There's a lot of different ways you can get some of these things going on. Now, I'm not saying necessarily this was for sure. We are going to prove whether or not it was, but we have a few things we're going to have to break down here. So let's break down the findings here. Multiple head and craniocerebral injuries to include external right frontotemporal abraded contusion, right frontotemporal deep scalp hemorrhage involving superior aspect of right temporalis muscle, non-displaced linear skull fracture starting beneath right temporalis muscle and becoming a diastatic fracture of the coronal suture, crossing midline and terminating in the superior aspect of the left parietal bone, with associated deep scalp hemorrhage adjacent to the fracture line. Small posterior occipital deep scalp contusion, acute left subdural hematoma with associated left to right shift, uncal herniation, and cerebellar coning. In other words, it kind of caved in. Contracoup or coup contusion to the left temporal parietal cerebral cortex with associated subarachnoid hemorrhage. Small eggshell fractures to the center of the right anterior cranial fossa, which basically means the bone split apart and kind of just eggshelled, if you will. You know, when you break open an eggshell, you see the little eggshell pieces that just kind of get all over the place or just fall into the eggs and all this. Yes, I'm terrible with eggs, but that's a good example. Cardiac abnormalities to include mitral valve with baggy redundancy of the valve leaflets and thickening of the valve leaflets, floppy mitral valve. Microscopic conformation of the mitral valve leaflets to contain an abnormal zona spongiosa. Pulmonary abnormalities to include acute passive congestion and edema of the pulmonary parenchyma, copious froth within the airways and oropharynx. In other words, she suffocated. Usually when you're seeing the frothing, it's seizing, but her airways were clogged with froth. So something was going on here. You can also get this from, digesting poison. Certain poisons will cause this. Just saying. All right. So this is just his comment. He says, in my opinion, Lori K. Klausutis died as a result of an acute subdural hematoma, which occurred as a result of closed head trauma sustained in a simple fall. Okay. Etiology of the unprotected fall appears to be as a result of cardiac arrhythmia from floppy mitral valve disease. The fall appears unprotected for two related reasons. First, there was no attempt of the person to guard against the fall. Okay. Doesn't mean she couldn't be hit. Doesn't mean she could be poisoned. All sorts of different things that can go into that, of course. But once again, we'll take this with a grain of salt or two, or bottle full. For example, sticking the hands or arms outward to brace or guard the head and body against impact with the floor or other objects, in this case, the desk. No injuries of any sort were identified on the hands or arms of Lori Klausutis. Secondly, is the significant amount of force that the fall generated, causing substantial internal head injuries. A conscious person capable of guarding a fall would normally not have hit the side of the desk with such a large amount of force as a near unconscious person free falling with no guarding reflexes. This finding emphasizes that there were no guarding reflexes in place. Okay. A lot of different things that can go and cause that. Did you check to go and see if maybe they were held? Did you go and check and see if they were bound? Did you go and check and see if they were just thrown that way? You can miss. You weren't able to go and protect yourself, simply put. There is no doubt that the head injury is as a result of a fall, rather than a blow being delivered to the head by a moving object. In other words, what he's trying to say is something wasn't thrown at her. She was not hit with an object. Okay, whatever. Lori has a classic contre-coup injury or bruise to the brain, meaning that her brain was bruised on the opposite side from where the external force was applied. Okay, so somebody could have still hit her or thrown something at her. You're saying it's not possible, but isn't it? The left side of Lori's brain was bruised while the external abraded contusion, scratch and bruise, was in the right temple region. The contre-coup contusion results when a freely moving, mobile head strikes an unyielding, firm, fixed object in a fall, as in the floor, or, in this case, the desk. This finding is in marked distinction from the coup contusion, or that injury which results from a moving object. Example, a baseball bat that strikes a stationary head. In the coup injury, there is bruising of the brain on the same side as the external injury. There was no coup contusion in Lori Klausutis. Okay, couldn't she be thrown? That already shows that then. And if you're thrown hard enough and fast enough, you can't react. Now, what happens if maybe she was poisoned and was just like suffocating, or she was seizing or something? Isn't that possible? There are only about 3 entities that generally cause one to drop in mid-sentence or in mid-stride. First is a pulmonary embolus, a blood clot that typically forms in the leg veins and breaks loose and travels up to the heart and blocks the circulation of blood to the lungs. Lori had no evidence grossly or microscopically of a pulmonary embolus. Second is a significant intracranial hemorrhage, catastrophic event, inside the brain itself or from a ruptured aneurysm. Lori only had the external bruise from or to the surface of her brain. There was no intraparenchymal brain hemorrhage or ruptured aneurysm to have rendered Lori unconscious. Third, and most common, is a sudden cardiac arrhythmia. I'd like to see how common this is here. Okay. Floppy mitral valve patients can have several complications of their disease to include sudden cardiac arrhythmias. In some patients with floppy mitral valve who have died suddenly, monitoring revealed ventricle tachycardia degenerating to ventricle fibrillation. Neither of these rhythms will typically sustain an adequate blood pressure to maintain consciousness in the individual with these rhythms. Persons with floppy mitral valve also have an increased incidence of ventricular and atrial ectopy, abnormal extra and skipped heartbeats, which may precede either the ventricle tachycardia or ventricular fibrillation. There are 2 independent corroborative witness statements that indicate Lori was not feeling well the day of her demise. One witness talked with her personally, and she indicated that she was, quote, anxious and did not feel quite right, end quote. These feelings could easily be those associated with extra or skipped heartbeats. Unfortunately, an autopsy cannot identify cardiac arrhythmia. This is an electrical event of the heart that requires a live patient. An autopsy can, however, identify those known cardiac conditions, grossly and microscopically, that are associated with cardiac arrhythmias that present themselves during life. A thorough forensic autopsy allows exclusion of other entities known to cause sudden death. Little interesting here. That's all I'm going to say. But I digress. In this case, Lori Klausutis did not have a pulmonary embolus or an intraparenchymal brain hemorrhage or ruptured aneurysm. Her drug screen was unremarkable, with no drugs in her system to cause her to suddenly become unconscious. These facts leave only a cardiac arrhythmia as the reason to go unconscious and subsequently fall and strike the desk in an unprotected fashion. If Lori's heart was normal, it would be problematic to postulate a plausible reason for cardiac arrhythmia in such a young person. However, her heart was not normal. The heart contained an abnormality, floppy mitral valve, that is known to result in cardiac ectopy and dangerous cardiac arrhythmias. Floppy mitral valve reportedly occurs in around 5% of the general population, being found in teenagers, young adults, and the elderly. Survival curves of populations with floppy mitral valve are indistinguishable from survival curves of the general population. Therefore, the incidence of sudden death in this disorder is low. Okay. However, the population with the condition is extremely large. Accordingly, deaths due to the floppy mitral valve are not rare in a busy medical examiner's practice. In summary, Laura Klausutis died as a result of the injury sustained when she struck the desk in an unprotected fashion. However, the etiology of the fall was most likely as a result of a sudden cardiac arrhythmia from her undiagnosed floppy mitral valve disease. So it was undiagnosed, which means nobody really knew, and she just kind of kept just trucking along, which means she had a disease and nobody knew. That's all it really is. But isn't there a way to go and show this? Now, they're also saying this is extremely large. It's somewhat common in that all other reasonable causes of death or sudden death and injuries to cause fatalities have been excluded by autopsy and toxicologic studies. This leaves only the logical conclusion that the floppy mitral valve is the only viable remaining etiology that would have caused Lori Klausutis to, in essence, drop in mid-stride. The manner of death is thus ruled as accidental. The above findings are rendered within a reasonable degree of medical certainty. Okay, in other words, what he's trying to say is, I'm the doctor, not the medical examiner here. Trust me because, well, I got a degree. Well, just to put it bluntly, we know that science is not infallible. It can be wrong. No science is perfect. It can be the truth of the matter is that it may be A back then, but it could also be B now. Things change. We find out more. As time goes on, we learn more. They say trust the science, right? Well, they did here. Is it 100%? There's some issues here. But we're not going to dig into the medical examiner per se. We're going to go and look at his report. Okay. So, date of and time of examination under the provisions of Chapter 406, Section 11 of the Florida State Statutes, an autopsy is performed at the Okaloosa Medical Examiner's Office on Friday, July 20th, 2001, beginning at 2:30 p.m. In attendance were Janet Hutter of the Medical Examiner's Office, Kenneth Dusty Rhodes, and Detective Dan Sequira of the Fort Walton Beach Police Department. Okay, now I'm not going to get into what she was wearing, but we have to, unfortunately, because it was alleged that she had an affair with the government official, Joe Scarborough. So let's take a look. What was she wearing? Now, this is why this is important. Was she in work attire, affair attire, or was she in whistleblower or breakup attire? The deceased is clad in an olive green pullover shirt with underlying white brassiere. So she's wearing a white bra under an olive green pullover shirt. Okay. The deceased is wearing a pair of tan khaki slacks with an underlying white undergarment. So white thong. Okay. I don't know why I'm being all prude about it. The deceased is also wearing a pair of tan socks and brown Einer loafers. So she's cozy, is what this is. She's wearing some cozy clothes. Is really what it is. So she's kind of casual. Located within each earlobe is a studded gold seashell. Located around the neck is a gold-colored metallic chain with a single gold-colored boxcar with the inscription Lori. Located on the left wrist is a gold-colored Seiko watch with a brown leather wristband, or leather band. The time is correct. Located on the left fourth ring finger is a gold-colored wedding set comprised of a single gold-colored metallic band and a gold-colored ring containing a single clear stone. Also accompanying the body was a black purse and satchel. Identified in the purse are miscellaneous personal items, papers, credit cards, checkbook, gold-colored earrings, and car keys. There is $19.69 in cash and change within the purse. Located within the briefcase are miscellaneous papers and a date book. No other clothing or personal effects accompany the body. Now, what I would like to know, what were these miscellaneous papers and what was the date book? What was in there? We'll continue. Still, she's in casual clothes. Was she there for work? You look at what was July 20th, 2001. I'm bringing it up, don't worry. So let's take a look. All right, 2001. It's July 20th, so 19th and 20th. In that time frame, that's Thursday to Friday. So that would have been a work day, more than likely. Casual clothes. Usually campaign officials, people that are getting ready to campaign and things like this, and you got to look at her job and all this kind of stuff. She was an aide, if I'm not mistaken, an aide or intern for Mr. Scarborough. This would have been a work day. Now that's where we got to look at the time. So, her body was found at 2:30 p.m. They don't know when she died. They said it could have been the night prior. Why would she be there in casual clothes the night prior? That's a work day. But she wouldn't have been in casual clothes if she's at the campaign office. See what I'm saying? This is where things get a little funky. So you'll start to notice some things here pretty soon. So, the body is that of a normally developed, normally nourished young adult white female appearing the listed age of 28 years. Body measures approximately 6 to 7 inches and weighs 149 pounds. There is near fixed posterior dependent lividity with blanching over the scapular and buttock regions. If I'm not mistaken, I do believe this means she was on her back. Rigor mortis is fully developed within the small and large joints. So you take a look at how long does it take for rigor mortis. I believe it's like within 8 hours or so. It's about how long it lasts. I believe it's how long it is. It's 8 or 16 hours, something like that. So more in that range. Let's see. Rigor mortis is fully developed within the small and large joints. So it's fully developed in the joints, which means she hadn't been dead that long. I mean, she'd been dead probably, more than likely a few hours or so. Scalp is, but you also got to be looking, there's a lot of other things that go into it. Body dies, what happens? It starts going to rigor mortis pretty quickly. Body starts breaking itself down, right? And then you've also got the heat. So you'd have to look. This is in July in Florida. It's humid. You start looking at all these different things. Now, this also was in his office. So in his office, I would bet quite a bit that yes, he probably had AC. If not, there was some kind of cooling, so it wouldn't have been that hot. And if it was the night prior, same kind of thing. So, and all this data is available. So we're going to take a look at this. Evidence of injury The scalp is focally traumatic and will be further described under, quote, evidence of injury, end quote. The scalp is covered with 7-inch red hair. No excessive facial hair is present. The corneas are clear, which means she'd been dead for a couple hours. Basically, it just means her eyes have shown that she's dead. The dead eyes, if you will. There are contact lenses in place. So, typically wore glasses. The irides, irises, whatever, are green, and each pupil measures 0.5 centimeters in maximum diameter. Now, this is where it comes into... You've got all sorts of different things that affect this. You got light, you got drugs, you've got alcohol in certain drinks, you got certain poisons, adrenaline, all sorts of different things. They can affect your pupils, okay? And your irises. Or pupil, my bad. Iris is the color. What am I doing? There we go. This sclerae are conjunctivae, appear anectoric, and are free of pedicile hemorrhages. The ears are unremarkable and free of drainage from the external auditory canals, which means the body hadn't really been starting to break down too much, which means the body had just recently died. Okay? The nares and oropharynx are remarkable for copious amounts of white froth protruding from the lumens. Okay? This is all important. This is giving us the time of death. We had, at least a range. Now remember, we used this during the David Crowley case. We've looked at this. Now we know for a fact he didn't do it. And how do we break that down? Well, we broke down all sorts of different instances. It came down to the body, the mold growth, all this. Well, there's no mold here. Now this is where we're going to be getting closer to the police arrived shortly after the body, after she died. So this is where things get a little interesting here. The face, in general, has a moderate amount of acne present. The neck is unremarkable, with no evidence of injury to include fingernail abrasions, contusions, or other significant injuries. Chest is symmetric and contains small, flat breasts which are free of palpable masses. The abdomen is flat and unremarkable. The back is unremarkable. The upper extremities are free of edema or evidence of acute injury. The hands and fingers appear unremarkable. The fingernails are medium length and unremarkable. There's no blood or tissue identified underneath the fingernails. Basically, what they're trying to say is here, well, she didn't scratch her or scratch whoever did this to her. If there was anybody that did this, it's trying to go and say, oh, well, you didn't, there wasn't any foul play. Is basically what they're trying to say here, but could there still be? Yes, there can. There is no blood or tissue identified underneath the fingernails. Examination of the of the external genitalia reveals a shaved genital region with no evidence of acute injury. So basically, they're trying to go and show here is, there was no rape, there was nothing like that, no sexual acts. Well, okay, they're trying to go and really avoid that. Now, I'm not saying there was. I'm not saying there isn't or wasn't. We don't know for a fact. This is just what this says here. We're going to break things down. That's the whole point of this. The lower extremities are free of edema or evidence of acute injury. The ankles and feet are remarkable for the toes being pointed in a marked plantar flexed position. Marked plantar flexed position. Keep that in mind, because now we have to go back up. What's she wearing for feet? Or on her feet? She's wearing loafers. So this is where the feet are going to go and pay a little. We're going to pay a little attention to that later. The toenails are short and unremarkable. No tattoos or distinguishing marks. No evidence of medical or surgical therapy. We're not going to go over this again, but really, they're trying to go and show off. Here's the size of the wound. And they try to kind of match it up with the desk. So now we're not going to go over all the internal examination, but we're going to go over bits and pieces. The neck, for instance, that's attached to the head. I know that I don't really have to explain that to everybody, but I'm going to. It plays a key factor here. When you've got head impact, you're going to have some action that hits the neck. Okay, you knock on your head. Does that necessarily do anything to your neck? Well, you're sending vibrations down. You knock on your head, you send vibrations throughout your body. Now, as far as it goes down pretty significantly. A lot farther than you'd think it would. Just barely knock on your head, and it travels. Now, you slam into something, that's going to go down your body. It's going to go down your spine. It's going to go and it's going to reverberate all over the place. So, your neck is going to be for sure an area where we need to take a look at this. Neck muscles appear unremarkable and are without evidence of trauma. There would have been some evidence of trauma. She hit her head. Chances are it's going to be tweaked a bit. A layered dissection of the neck reveals no evidence of hemorrhage within either the superficial or deep musculature. Now, this is the other important part. The hyoid bone in the thyroid and cricoid cartilages are calcifying and intact without evidence of injury. Now, this is basically saying she wasn't strangled. Somebody didn't go and assassinate her with a garrote. Yeah, that's all this basically saying here. It's the hitman bone. The usual anatomic relationships are preserved. The cervical spine is intact and free of fractures. There's no evidence of infection or neoplasm. The tongue is removed and is free of bite marks or evidence of injury. Doesn't mean she couldn't have seized. Doesn't mean somebody couldn't have thrown her in to the desk. Body cavities. Body cavities are open in the usual manner. The internal viscera have their normal positions in anatomic relationships. The left and right pleural cavities are moist and contain no significant fluid accumulations. The pleural surfaces are smooth and glistening and free of fibrous adhesions, which means the body hadn't really started breaking it down. Which further gives us more evidence that, well, she had just recently died. But why was she in the building? And even then, you'd be looking, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is going to be within about 4 hours, give or take. And this is all based on what we've got here. So you've got the body isn't really breaking down. Well, the body almost instantly starts breaking down, but we're seeing that her body cavities are still smooth and glistening and free of fibrous adhesions, which means the body hasn't really gotten a chance to break it down. Now, this is internal, but what does the body usually start with? The torso. And it's going to start with things like the stomach and intestines, the lungs, things like that. It's going to break these things down first. Why? Because it's just how it works. It's going to give it the most buildup. We know there wasn't really a whole lot of, we're going to get into it, but there's not a whole lot of bloating or anything. But it's more about the bacteria, the internal bacteria, which helps keep us alive and keeps us functioning and all this. It turns on us after we die. And it starts to break down the body. Okay, that's how this all works. No pericardial adhesions are identified. The leaves of the diaphragm are intact and without evidence of injury. The peritoneal cavity is moist with no significant fluid accumulation. Peritoneal surfaces are smooth and glistening and are free of fibrous adhesion formation. No evidence of infection or neoplasm is present. So she's healthy. So it's showing here. So far. Cardiovascular system. The heart is normal in size and weighs 265 grams. The epicardial surface is glistening and free of petechial hemorrhages. The chambers demonstrate their usual size, shape, and configuration with no gross dilation. Coronary arteries have a right-sided dominance, and serial sectioning reveals widely patent coronary arteries with no significant atherosclerotic plaque formation, which means not a heart attack. This is somebody that's somewhat healthy, or pretty dang healthy. So she's got a clean heart. No hemorrhagic plaques or thrombi are identified. Cut sections of the ventricular myocardium reveal a beefy red, homogeneous parenchyma with no thickening or scarring being identified. I mean, her heart's not struggling. Remember, she apparently had this heart disease, and she apparently had all these heart problems. This is showing not really. Didn't have many problems. The cardiac valves are primarily thin and delicate and are free of vegetations or thickening of the choroidae tendineae, with the exception of the mitral valve. The mitral valve is remarkable for prominent parachuting hooding of both valve leaflets. There is multifocal thickening of both leaflets with white tan plaques identified within multiple regions of the valves. There is thickening of the valve cusps. No vegetations are identified on the valve cusp. The atria are of normal size and the endocardial surfaces are free of mural thrombi. The aorta follows its usual course and the origins of the major vessels are normally placed and unremarkable. The aorta contains an occasional yellow atheromatous streak. There is no evidence of aneurysm formation. This is showing her heart was fine. The mitral valve is an issue, sure, but her heart was healthy. Interesting. Okay, well, let's check out her lungs, because we've got other things we're going to go and look at here, either be tonight or next week. The larynx and trachea show no abnormalities other than containing marked amounts of white froth, which extend from the distal airways up out of the oropharynx. The right lung weighs 780 grams. The left lung weighs 670 grams. The lungs have their normal libations. The cut surfaces of the lungs reveal a remarkably congested red parenchyma with some accentuation within the posterior basilar segments. Serosanguinous fluid is easily exuded from the cut surface. There are no consolidations or nodules identified. No evidence of infection or neoplasm is present. The proximal pulmonary arteries are open and are free of thromboemboli. So basically, what it's saying here is healthy, clean lungs with all this frothing in there. Well, she died. She was bleeding. So now we have to go and really narrow down what caused the frothing. We'll break it down. So you can see, basically what it's saying here, she's healthy. She's actually really healthy. All of this breaks the same way down. So, let's break this down. Procedures they did. Identification photograph taken. Injury photographs taken. Small tissue specimens are retained in 10% formalin. Peripheral blood, urine, vitreous, and bile are retained for toxicologic analysis. Oral, vaginal, and anal swabs are taken by myself and slides prepared by myself with the evidence of being retained. Fingernail clippings, head hair standards, and blood are retained. Clothing is retained as evidence of Kenneth Rhodes of the Fort Walton Beach Police Department. Fingerprints are taken and retained as evidence by Kenneth Rhodes of the Fort Walton Beach Police Department. So now he wants to get into the microscopic stuff. This is where he gets into the heart. It says representative sections of the left and right ventricular myocardium reveal a similar histology characterized by normal appearing myocytes. No fibrous acute inflammatory cell infiltrates. Granulomas or other significant pathologic abnormalities are identified. Multiple sections of the abnormal mitral valve reveal a marked involvement of the zona spongiosa with mucinous degenerative changes These changes extend on into the zona fibrosa of the valve. Basically, what he's trying to say is, well, microscopically, her heart's, there's an issue there. But it's an issue. It's a small little issue here. And see, and then he goes on the lungs. So he's trying to say, okay, it was the heart and lung issue. So where you're getting all the extra fluid. This is where things get interesting. We're not going to break into it because we've only got a few more minutes left. So I want to try and cover some more. All right, let's keep going. Oh, it is page 18. So that's what we've got. Try to say basically, okay, well, there's some issues with the heart and the lungs. And then of course there's the injury to the brain and the bone there. And basically just tries to line it up as much as possible. Okay? That's how this breaks down. So you can already see some of this is already kind of fallen into place. Well, we know this is what he claimed. But did we see anything about drug usage? Viruses, poisons. We didn't see any of that. Now, you'd see some of the poison and toxicology. You'd see some basic stuff in here. But they don't show anything, which means the toxicology report is probably very clean is what it's showing. But there's poisons that they go undetected. It's very hard to see. Now, is it possible that maybe she was hit with a poison that caused this exact method of death? It's a possibility. All I got to say is we got to look into the church committee. What did they reveal? CIA, for instance, they have a heart attack gun. Literally shoots a little ice dart. It'll leave a little red mark wherever it hits. But it gives the victim a heart attack. Makes it look natural. Kind of hard to look natural when you're healthy like this. And so young. Something to think about. But President Trump brought this up in 2020. Brought it up on Twitter. Talked about Joe Scarborough and his new wife, Mika, or Micah, whatever her name is. They're talk show hosts together, or rather TV anchors or hosts or whatever of their show, The Morning Joe, right? Well, Mrs. Klausutis' widowed husband wrote a letter to Jack Dorsey because he didn't like the fact that people were going about talking about this case. He didn't want her remembered in a bad way, apparently. If somebody's partner died in a weird circumstance in a place that's kind of weird, at a time that's a little weird, things like this. There's a lot of different weird circumstances here. Wouldn't you want to know if it was murder or not? I think most people would. Now, we already looked at the situation. It's a little weird. Not going to lie. Let's continue. Mr. Dorsey. Nearly 19 years ago, my wife, who had an undiagnosed heart condition, fell and hit her head on her desk at work. She was found dead the next morning. Look at that. He's trying to go and say that it was the night prior. Her name is Lori K. Klausutis, and she was 28 years old when she died. Her passing is the single most painful thing I have ever had to deal with in my 52 years, and continues to haunt her parents and sister. Well, 19 years prior to that, 52, that goes on down to 33. She was 28. Okay, so 5-year difference. Okay. I'll bite. Continues to haunt her parents and sister. I have mourned my wife every day since her passing. I have tried to honor her memory and our marriage. As her husband, I feel that one of my marital obligations is to protect her memory as I would have protected her in life. But you didn't. But that's neither here nor there. Did he know she died at work? We don't know for sure. This is what he's saying. So we'd have to go back and we'd have to take a look and see. What did he say back then? Was she shocked that she was there? Was he mad? What was going on? Let's see. There has been a constant barrage of falsehoods, half-truths, and innuendo and conspiracy theories since the day she died. I realize that that may sound like an exaggeration. Unfortunately, it is the verifiable truth. Because of this, I have struggled to move forward with my life. The frequency, intensity, ugliness, and promulgation of these horrifying lies ever increases on the internet. These conspiracy theorists, including most recently the President of the United States, continue to spread their bile and misinformation on your platform, disparaging the memory of my wife and our marriage. President Trump on Tuesday tweeted to his nearly 80 million followers, alluding to the repeatedly debunked falsehood that my wife was murdered by her boss, former U.S. Representative, so he's U.S. Representative, not Congressman, Joe Scarborough. Son of the president followed and more directly attacked my wife by tweeting to his followers as the means of spreading this vicious lie. I'm sure you are aware of this situation because media around the world have covered it, but just in case, here it is. President Trump tweeted, when will they open a cold case on the psycho Joe Scarborough matter in Florida? Did he get away with murder? Some people think so. Why did he leave Congress so quietly and quickly? Isn't it obvious? What's happening now? A total nut job. That was on May 12, 2020. Next up, we have Comcast should open up a long overdue Florida cold case against Psycho Joe Scarborough. I know him and Crazy Michael well. Used them beautifully in the last election. Dumped them nicely and will state on the record that he is nuts. Besides bad ratings. Hashtag Open Joe Cold Case. That was on May 4th, 2020. Donald Trump Jr. Tweeted, what show is Joe going to go on to discuss Lori Klausutis? Interesting. My request is simple. Please delete these tweets. I'm a research engineer and not a lawyer, but I've reviewed all of Twitter's rules and terms of service. The president's tweets that suggest that Lori was murdered without any evidence, and contrary to the official autopsy, is a violation of Twitter's community rules and terms of service. An ordinary user like me would be banished from the platform for such a tweet, but I am only asking that these tweets be removed. I am now angry as well as frustrated and grieved. I understand that Twitter's policies about content are designed to maintain the appearance that your hands are clean. You provide the platform and the rest is up to users. However, in certain past cases, Twitter has removed content and accounts that are inconsistent with your terms of service. I'm asking you to intervene in this instance because the President of the United States has taken something that does not belong to him, the memory of my dead wife, and perverted it for perceived political gain. I would also ask that you consider Lori's niece and 2 nephews who will eventually come across this filth in the future. They have never met their aunt, and it pains me to think that they would ever have to, quote, learn, end quote, about her this way. My wife deserves better. Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Sincerely, Tim Klausutis, PhD. He's a research engineer. Where's he work? Probably a data farm. Okay. A lot of these guys, that's where they work. Who knows? Nor does it really matter. But if you start looking into these tweets here, you look into President Donald Trump's tweets, leads you here. Look at the date here, March 15th, 2011. Many Americans probably have forgotten or never knew that a 28-year-old female staff member was found dead in the summer of 2001 in the office of U.S. Representative Joe Scarborough, Republican from Florida. Officials in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, determined that Lori Klausutis died from an accident. Mainstream press largely ignored the case, but our review of several investigative reports indicates that official findings is highly questionable. So, what they say here, the nature of the head trauma does not suggest an accidental death. Dr. Michael Birkeland, medical examiner, determined that Klausutis had an undiagnosed cardiac arrhythmia that caused her to faint and hit her head on a desk in Scarborough's office. It is a little weird. Once again, undiagnosed. Typically, when people have heart problems, they don't sit there and run and all this kind of stuff. I'm going to break that down. The fainting story does not add up. What is the likelihood that an apparently healthy woman who ran marathons would faint and hit her head on a desk in such a way that it would cause death? It's pretty unlikely, our research indicates. Once again, this goes to reports are in the American Politics Journal. A report at onlinejournal.com stated that such a fall in a healthy person is unlikely to cause death. Birkeland's determination of an accidental death, however, brought the investigation to a virtual halt. Wanted it covered up. Medical examiner had a troubled history. Before moving to Florida, Dr. Birkeland had practiced in Kansas City, Missouri. His time there ended in controversy. So, that's how we break it down. Here's some oddities. Congressman, an ardent and vocal supporter of George W. Bush, by the way, resigns only 6 months after a re-election, just prior to his aide's death. The reason, amid rumors of marital infidelity, the recently divorced husband wants to spend more time with his sons. Medical examiner who had his license revoked in another state. Why? He lost it, falsifying autopsies. Check that. Falsifying autopsies. Medical examiner's supervisor had contributed thousands of dollars to the congressman's election campaign. Same medical examiner who falsified autopsies, his boss was contributing thousands of dollars to Scarborough's campaign. His former boss in another state, Kansas City, Missouri, is supporting somebody from Florida who has no effect on him directly. It's a little curious. Contradictory reports about whether there is a visible head injury or not. And that goes into the report itself. You guys didn't catch that. Medical conclusion that contains several inconsistencies. First, that Mrs. Klausutis, who was a marathon runner, died of a cardiac arrhythmia. Second, that although she had suffered a fractured skull and a contrecoup bruise on the opposite side of the brain, the injury could not possibly have been caused by a physical assault. Exactly. Then there's the question of whether the office was locked and the lights were on. One report says the door was locked and the lights were off. Another report says the door was unlocked and the lights were on. Exactly, which goes back to what he has to say here about his wife. Interesting. But that's where we're going to leave it tonight. And just remember, come back next week for some more True Crime Wednesday. It's for a sure thing. Dates will possibly be changing to Fridays instead. I'm still trying to figure this whole thing out with the new job schedule and all this. But this weekend, there's also another episode of Real News Now with Strange Investigations. So lots and lots of news over the last 2 weeks. So you guys really should check it out. It's pretty informational. It's non-biased, non-partisan. There's a few biased jokes from time to time, sure, but all fun and games. But it's the news. It's just the cold, hard truth. So come check it out. And expect there will be some Exploring Rain City content coming out in the next few weeks. Just got to go and get caught up on some of the work I need to, and then we'll be going over some story content, so you guys will be able to go and kind of hear some backstories, things that are actually going to be appearing in Corvus Nocturna.